Hello, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Morgan Casillas, and I am obviously I am in the Mass Communications Master's program here at Oklahoma State, specifically with a focus on sports communications. And today I'll be talking about one of the most influential ideas in media research, the agenda setting theory, which was developed by Maxwell Combs and Donald Shaw in 1972. The core idea is simple but powerful. The media may not tell us what to think, but they tell us what to think about. That quote originally came from political scientist Bernard Cohen in 1963, and it captures how news outlets shape public awareness by deciding which issues get attention. In this presentation, I'll explain where the theory came from, how it has evolved, and why it's still incredibly relevant today, especially in our ever changing digital and social media world. What is agenda setting? Agenda setting is about the way media influences what we think about, but not necessarily what we believe. Think about the last major news cycle, maybe the 2024 presidential debates, or a big cultural moment like the student loan forgiveness debate. You probably saw the same issues repeated across TV, social media, and online news until they seemed it was the most important thing happening at the moment. That's the agenda setting process in action. Only a few issues become dominant in the public mind while others fade into the background. Bernard Cohen recognized this decades ago when he said the press is stunningly successful in telling people what to think about. So, agenda setting isn't about persuasion or opinion change, it's about issue salience, or what society collectively believes deserves attention. The theory was first tested by McCombs and Shaw in their famous 1972 study during the 1968 U.S. presidential election. They interviewed undecided voters in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, asking which issues they thought were most important. Then they analyzed local newspapers, news magazines, and TV broadcasts to see which topics the media covered most heavily. The results were groundbreaking. There was a 0.9967 correlation between the issues emphasized in the media and the issues voters said that mattered the most. That means that the media agenda and the public agenda were almost perfectly aligned. This study provided strong evidence that the media set the agenda for public concern. It also opened the door for decades of research exploring how media attention translates into public priorities. In the 1980s, researchers Chanteau, I'm going to butcher this, Chanteau Lingar, and Donald Kinder explained the theory through controlled experiments. They showed groups of participants edited versions of news broadcasts that emphasized specific problems like unemployment, national defense, or inflation, and then asked them which issues they thought were most important to the country. The results clearly demonstrated casualty. The people who saw more coverage of a specific issue began to rank it as most important. They also introduced several related ideas. The first one being priming, the way repeated exposure to an issue influences how we evaluate leaders and policies. For example, if the media consistently or constantly talk about the economy, people start judging presidents based mainly on economic performance. The next being story position. Lead stories have stronger agenda setting power because audiences see them first and perceive them as the most newsworthy out of everything. The third one being vividness. Overly emotional or dramatic stories can actually weaken the agenda setting theory effects because they make us focus on individuals rather than the issue itself. Together, these findings deepened our understanding of how the media shapes not just attention, but also how we think about public priorities. Now we'll continue on into agenda building. As the theory evolved, researchers realized that agenda setting isn't a one-way street. It's a part of a larger process called agenda building. This concept was developed by Kurt and Gladys Lang in 1983, who defined it as a collective process in which the media, government, and the public influence one another. In other words, journalists don't simply decide topics on their own, they respond to political leaders and social movements and public interest. For instance, during the #MeToo movement, activists and everyday people used social media to bring attention to sexual harassment and gender inequality. The media then amplified those stories, which pressured policymakers and institutions to respond. That's agenda building in action. A cycle of influence where citizens, journalists, and politicians each play a role in shaping the national conversation. Today, this concept has become even more complex of the digital participation and online activism. Continuing on, in the digital age, agenda setting has taken on a new life through what researchers call intermediate agenda building, where traditional media and online platforms influence one another. For example, journalists now monitor what's trending on X, or formerly Twitter, TikTok, and Reddit to identify stories that are gaining traction. At the same time, when major news outlets publish a story, it spreads across social media, shaping what users discuss and share. Researchers like Katona Ni and Sarvari, butcher that, describe this new environment as agenda chasing. Rather than leading the conversation, traditional media often chase whatever topics are already popular online because audience attention now determines revenue and visibility. Algorithms also play a massive role here. Platforms promote content that keeps users engaged, meaning the agenda can be shaped by data and algorithms as much as as much as by journalists. So in today's world, the power set to the agenda is shaped among news outlets, social media users, and digital platforms themselves. According to communication scholars and what was summarized in our textbook for this class, the agenda setting theory has several major strengths and weaknesses. Talking about strengths, the first one being it explains how media can powerfully shape public priorities even without changing individual opinions. Two, it's backed by decades of empirical research across different countries and topics, and in different climates or political climates. And three, it connects with related concepts like priming and story position, helping explain why certain news stories dominate public attention. And lastly, it applies both traditional media and digital media, showing its flexibility over time. Moving into the weaknesses, the first one being it's still difficult to prove causality. Like, does the media influence the public, or does the public interest influence what media cover? It has mostly been applied to political and news content and not entertainment or lifestyle media. And lastly, in the age of social media, the direction of influence has become less clear, and audiences now help set the media agenda through sharing, posting, and trending topics. I believe that despite these weaknesses, the theory's adaptability is what keeps it relevant in today's fragmented media environment. Moving on to our last slide. So to wrap up, agenda setting theory remains one of the most foundational ideas in communication research because it really helps us understand how media attention creates public importance. Even in our ever-changing current digital world where influencers, algorithms, and viral trends dominate, the same principle still applies. Visibility equals significance. And media shape what we think about, but not necessarily what we think. Today, power is distributed among journalists, social media users, and algorithms, but the process of deciding what matters hasn't gone away, it's just evolved. Bernard Cohen's famous quote still rings true to more than 60 years later. The media may not tell us what to think, but they tell us what to think about. Thank you for listening, and I hope that this gave you all a clear and updated understanding of how the agenda setting theory explains the media's continuing power to shape our shared reality. Thank you all so much for your time and attention, and I really look forward to your feedback and discussing how you see the agenda setting theory play out in today's media environment, from traditional journalism to TikTok and algorithm-driven news feeds. And then finally, I have listed my sources, including the foundational works by Cohen, McCombs, and Shaw, and all the other great researchers that I touched on and who all expanded this theory into new areas of communication research that we get to learn about today.